train
No.
about an hour and a half a day,
Yeah.
5 days a week.
I could totally beat you. Oh my God, it's so not even difficult. I just have that thumb move.
Because I'm not going to hit back. I'll take it, whatever you got.
I just twist your thumb, and then you go, that whole thumb move, then you go right down.
I did it to you the other day. I took her hands and I went like, ah.
I cried, and I said, please stop.
I did
and you
two
stopped.
fingers. I went, ah.
Okay, fine. Great show tonight, by the way.
Thank you. Listen, good to see you when you're in New York. We've got a little plan that we're going to have with me, you, and Tucker, but we're not going to announce it today.
Oh, good. I don't even know what it is, so it's a good surprise. Excellent.
You do know, but you forgot.
Oh, okay. Well, all right, Hannity.
Have a great show.
All right, talk to you later. Good evening from Washington. I'm Laura Ingraham. This is the Ingraham Angle. Welcome back on a very busy Monday. An increasingly violent strain of the radical left lashing out over the past few days. We're going to show you some of the shocking videos involving a Marine recruiting station and a lot more, plus an unbelievable story. It's a heartbreaker and infuriating out of New Mexico involving a child abduction ring and radical Muslim extremists. Yes, in the United States of America. Unbelievable. A story you will not want to miss later in this hour. But first, bullets and blame. Another weekend in Chicago. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Chicago just recorded its deadliest weekend of the year with 66 shot and 12 killed in just a 63-hour period, including a boy riding his bike and a 14-year-old and two 17-year-old girls just standing on the sidewalk.
We have a heavy heart. Our souls are burdened. What happened this weekend did not happen in every neighborhood in Chicago, but it is unacceptable to happen in any neighborhood of Chicago.
Well, so far this year, 1,785 have been shot in Chicago and 318 killed. Now, believe it or not, shootings are actually down 30% from 2017, and murders are down 25%, but still those figures are well above what Chicago experienced earlier in the decade. In 2011, when Democratic Mayor Rahm Emanuel was elected, there were 436 murders in Chicago. By 2016, that number had ballooned to 771, a 77% increase. And while 2017 was down from that high water mark, it still saw a devastating 650 slayings. Now, as you might imagine, there's enormous political pressure now on Emanuel to offer solutions to this heartbreaking cycle. It's about time. With that election just months away, he responded today sounding more like Tom Sowell than an Obama liberal.
You can talk about the weather, but the weather didn't pull the trigger. And you can talk about jobs, and they count. But in parts of the city where there aren't jobs, people did not pull a trigger. There are too many guns on the street, too many people with criminal records on the street, and there is a shortage of values about what is right, what is wrong, what is acceptable, what is condoned, and what is condemned.
I can't believe I'm saying this, but on that, he's right. Of course, policing and economic opportunity matter. They matter quite a bit. But are those the factors that are definitive? Of course not. In 2017, the victims of homicide in Chicago were 76% African American, and a disproportionate number of the assailants arrested were also black, primarily male. So what's the cause? Well, if you ask a leftist or the intellectuals who dominate our universities, they'll blame crime on institutional racism or maybe poverty. But as economist Tom Sowell wrote just a few years ago after the Ferguson riots, you cannot take any people of any color and exempt them from the requirements of civilization without ruinous consequences to them and to society at large. Murder rates among black males were going down, repeat down, during much of the much lamented 1950s, while it went up after the much celebrated 1960s, reaching levels more than double what they had been before. Most black children were raised in two-parent families prior to the 1960s, but today, the great majority of black children are raised in one-parent families. Now, to put it a little bit more specifically, in 1950, 17% of black children lived in single-parent households. At that point, black labor participation rate exceeded that of whites. But today, 70% of black children live in one-parent households, and that number is pretty much reversed. Now, moms do their best, of course, and they're heroic. But especially in dangerous areas, boys without fathers or male role models often get hooked in with really bad people. Remember this video from Baltimore, a mother urging her child very aggressively during the Freddie Gray riots. That's actually a mother's love. I mean, maybe she used some four-letter words, but she could have saved his life that day. And remember Barack Obama's My Brother's Keeper initiative. It was launched in 2014, and it started out as a way to assist at-risk boys, mostly of color. In the first year, he raised $300 million in corporate donations to help get young men jobs through mentoring and other work fairs, work projects. No real measure yet of the program's real impact, but to the extent that it stresses hard work and personal responsibility, I think it's great.
I stopped being nonchalant. I started caring about my grades and the difference between an A and a B. I started demanding more out of myself. I know excellence is possible, and I need to strive for that.
Too often, however, the social justice warriors fall into the grievance trap of excusing rather than punishing what ends up being criminal behavior. Now, remember the looting and the violence that we saw in Ferguson and Baltimore a few years ago during what were supposed to be protests about the deaths of Michael Brown and Freddie Gray? Well, President Obama used a My Brother's Keeper event to provide context, almost to explain away the violence.
Some communities have consistently had the odds stacked against them. That there's a tragic history in this country that has made it tougher for some. That sense of unfairness and of powerlessness, that's helped fuel some of the protests that we've seen in places like Baltimore and Ferguson. In too many places in this country, black boys and black men, Latino boys, Latino men, they experience being treated differently by law enforcement.
Well, I'm sure a lot of them do. But at some point, this becomes race baiting. And the king of this is Al Sharpton. Remember his contribution to stemming the violence in Chicago? His contribution was renting an apartment in the city for some period of time in 2013.
In September, we, Martin III and I, are going to take an apartment on the west side and stay among the people and walk children to school.
I'm pretty sure after we rented the apartment, things got worse, but I'm surprised that didn't do the trick. Great idea, Al. Look, I don't doubt that young people living in the Englewood or the West Garfield Park neighborhoods of Chicago can feel really hopeless and even distrustful against the police. But the real problem isn't aggressive policing. The real problem are gangs with memberships that have become generational. Young boys without fathers or any male role models. Anyone who cares about them who's a male are too often sucked into the cults of criminality. Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, who knows a thing or two about cleaning up a city, thinks it's time to show the man they once called Rombo the door, tweeting, "Chicago murders are a direct result of one-party Democratic rule for decades. Policing genius, Jerry, he meant Gary McCarthy, can do for Chicago what I did for New York City. He was one of the architects of Compstat. It slashed homicide over 70%, tens of thousands of lives saved." Well, it's true that citizens most affected seem to be growing very weary of Emanuel's political dance.
Ron Emanuel, first of all, is a con man. His whole job is to keep black folks divided.
No, he doesn't care about anybody but the people in his neighborhood and his family.
Opposition to Mayor Emanuel, Obama's protege, it's been building for many reasons. Part of it, the schools, the crime now. And remember how proud he was about this.
Chicago was a sanctuary city before anybody knew what sanctuary city meant. This ordinance that we are defending in the federal court is consistent with that value system. It not only it gives honor and import to our past, it actually shines a bright light to the future that we have together as a city.
Well, that's not going over so well on the South Side.
He cares more about non-citizens, African Americans. We're citizens, and our ancestors built this country.
He got some good things, but I think he don't step up and come to the people where the crime is. You know what I'm saying? The crime is on the South Side and the West Side.
And there's the abysmally low percentage of murderers brought to justice under his leadership. In 2017, the police solved only 114 of the 650 murders that occurred in the same year. That's 17.5% only. In the early 1990s, that figure was 60%. No wonder people on the South Side are frustrated. So many have promised to try to help Chicago, but few have delivered solutions. Maybe because hard truths are uncomfortable. And maybe because sometimes they're not politically correct. Now, I've been saying since the campaign of 2016 that we need to see more bold-thinking conservatives in the inner cities of this country. The risk is not in showing up. The risk is in not showing up. Solutions, not politics, are what is needed.
I have to make sure that President Trump recognized that not everyone believes that Chicago is a Trump-free zone. If he's serious about helping the people in Chicago, especially on the west side of Chicago, I accept his help. We can't turn any help away. We have to make sure that people understand that criminals cannot have their way with our streets. If Chicago Police Department and all the other law enforcements can't do it, we should seek other help.
Every day, radicals claim that President Trump is racist. Now, as someone who's known him for, 15 years or so, I can tell you that is 100% false. And it's a slanderous and defamatory charge meant to deflect attention from liberals' own abject failures in leading urban America. Trump's booming economy is benefiting African Americans and Latinos and all Americans who wish to better themselves. The one thing we do know, racial hucksters do not have the answers to prevent another weekend just like we saw in Chicago. And that's the angle. Joining us now with reaction, Gianno Caldwell, a Fox News political analyst and Chicago native who conducted those illuminating interviews you just saw with the Chicago residents. Illinois State Rep LaShawn Ford and Peter Koanis, a former Chicago police sergeant. Great to have all of you with us. Gianno, I just want to say to you first, I think what you did was so important in talking to the people who live in the most dangerous parts of Chicago. You didn't go up to the fancy neighborhoods. You went to where the people are. So congratulations and thank you for doing that report. It was really important. Gianno, give me the sense from what you experienced, and you experienced a lot growing up. You're from the area.
Yes.
Who are they blaming any one group of people, or are they just looking for solutions at this point?
Well, you know, Laura, today I come with a very heavy heart and a special message for every Chicagoan. Rahm Emanuel, as we know, has been in office since 2011. And since 2011, he's failed. He's failed to keep us safe. He's failed to keep our families safe, our friends, and even out-of-town visitors. My family has personally been impacted by the violence in Chicago. During Memorial Day last year, my little brother was in the car with two of his friends when two men walked up and shot the car 25 times. My little brother thankfully lived, but his best friend, bloodied in his arms, died. Now, considering Rahm Emanuel has been mayor since 2011 and murders have gone up, what we've seen is a mass genocide in the streets of Chicago. The only silver lining I see to a solution in terms of ridding this outside of President Trump coming in is the fact that we got an election that's coming up in the city of Chicago in several short months. And with that being the case, every Chicagoan needs to get out and vote Rahm Emanuel out of office. It's certainly true he didn't pull the trigger. I get that. But his policies and his inaction, rather, has enabled those that have pulled the trigger. You know that because the murders have gone up since he's been mayor.
I want to go to Representative Ford at this point and read for you something that was written a few years ago. Actually, this is a piece that was just written today, in the American Thinker. The title of it is, "It's Time to Hold Democrats Responsible for Chicago's Violence." The city's famed violence is all the result of gangs and Democrats being in bed with each other, one hand washing the other. Democratic politicians sidle up to gang leaders for votes and use their thugs as substitutes for their political organizations. They muscle voters to the polls for the Democrats, and anyone who rebels gets a beating. The left benefits, so it gives the gangs what they want. That's Monica Showalter quoting Glenn Reynolds' piece from 2012. Your thoughts on that, given the bloodshed that we've seen, Representative Ford, over the last really several years, even with the modest declines of the last year or so?
Well, I have to say that Chicago is worse than the days of Al Capone. It's the bloodiest city in America, and I have to say that Democrats have to step up. I'm a Democrat, and I'm saying that Democrats must step up. All of the Democrats, all of my colleagues must step up and put politics aside. We must work with President Trump, and we must demand that we get help in the city of Chicago, on the west side of Chicago, and in our south side community, so that we can bring safety to all of the communities in the city. There are 77 communities in the Chicago community, and every community is feeling the trauma from the violence and destruction that's happening in the bloody city of Chicago.
Representative Ford, I remember during the campaign that candidate Trump in March of 2016 had a speech scheduled in Chicago, and they had to cancel it because of threats of protest, violence. People say, "We don't want you here." I thought that was such a shame, because I actually think the more ideas, obviously the ideas that have been employed have failed. Now, he's done pretty well with the economy. Maybe he could bring some new thinking and some fresh ideas to this current situation. I think it's beyond tragic. I think you are brave as a Democrat for speaking out.
Absolutely.
And at least being open.
That's courageous.
You are going to get, and I know you've already gotten blowback, and I want to hear from, former police officer in Chicago who tell us the way things are on the street for the police, who have been oftentimes demonized. But he was not allowed to come to Chicago, an American city. That was outrageous. That told me a lot about Chicago. Back in March of 2016.
Less than a year ago, I lost my cousin on the west side of Chicago with his girlfriend in the car. I never told Giano that, and I haven't told anyone publicly, but they lost their lives in a car with some type of drive-by on the west side of Chicago to leave two kids without parents.
Sergeant Kokonis, unfortunately, it's a horrific story after horrific story, after heartbreak, after parent losing a child. Peter, give us your insights, please.
Well, Mr. Ford's saying the Democrats should step up. They should step out. The problem is we have a Democrat sheriff. We have a Democrat state's attorney, Kim Foxx. We have a Cook County president, Democrat. And what they're doing is reducing bonds, people getting out that commit crimes with guns, and they're giving no bond, an I bond. They're let to walk out. A man walks out after doing an armed carjacking. 2 days later, he does a carjacking again. Now they want to put him on a monitor. You can't do this. The policemen, they get in a car, they work for 8.5, 9 hours. They get no breaks, they get nothing. You have marchers, you have Al Sharpton. He rented an apartment, he never was here. You have Rahm Emanuel. He promised he's going to hire 1,000 policemen. It's 7 years later, he hasn't hired the policemen. You have marchers that march down Lakeshore Drive. You have marchers that march down to Dan Ryan. They didn't close expressways in Ferguson. the ministers and the false prophets and everything that we have in this city, unfortunately, it comes down to one thing. It's black young men killing black young men. And these two gentlemen talking about, my father was murdered by a gangbanger when in 1969, a 15-year-old kid went into a store and shot him so he could pay for the gun that he used to kill him. So I'm on both sides of the fence. I've been a victim of it, and now I fought against it. You're 100%. You hit it with your opening monologue was just perfect. The Democrats are doing nothing, and I don't care. You get a nonpartisan person running for mayor. You get somebody like Lightfoot or somebody like that actually knows how the system works.
We got to get
you
politics.
You can't let people walk.
Politics have to get out of it. Real common sense solutions. We have to do an hour on this topic because there's so many elements of it. Fantastic panel. I wish we had more time. Coming up, Antifa out of control. We'll tell you the story. Others aren't.
Politics.
Antifa striking out at new conservative targets. This morning in Philly, a mob from the radical left group went after commentators Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens at a cafe. Watch this. Now, to be clear, this is what looks to be a group of mostly white Antifa protesters chanting F white supremacy at a black conservative. They're really bright, too. Joining us now with a reaction, former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino, along with radio host, former Chuck Schumer aide, Chris Hahn. Okay, guys, we're going to hit this and this other Antifa issue with the Marine recruiting station in just a moment, but yeah, you kind of can't. I almost think, Dan, these are paid performers working for the RNC because it's so damaging to the Democrats. They're always targeting conservatives, and for what? Because they're organizing a bunch of young conservative people across the country. Like, what's their beef with Candace Owens? Like, what's their beef with her?
Laura, there's a bigger issue than just their beef with Candace Owens. It's not just about Candace Owens. It's about the radical left. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not talking about all Democrats. There are a lot of Democrats that are fed up with this, too, and are trying to move away from this because they realize, like you said, that this should be an RNC ad all the time. Nobody wants to be associated with this kind of insanity. But the radical left, Laura, this is who they are. This is who they've always been. Understand, there is no emergency brake on their behavior. They are godless people who believe in the brutal force of the state, and when they lose state power, which they have, their only outlet is violence. This does not apply to conservatives who have that emergency brake. They believe in big R rights granted by God, including rights granted to their liberal ideological opponents. That's why conservatives don't do this. They have the emergency brake. Radical liberals don't.
Chris, if this type of behavior were being conducted against a minority liberal by a group of people chanting the same type of things, I think the left would rightly be quite upset and probably would hold all sorts of vigils and demand community, meetings and prayer groups and so forth. But the Democrats, they kind of act like they just want this to go away, whereas I think we need more of a broad-based condemnation of this group.
I don't support this kind of protesting. I want to be very clear. I think protesting is important. I think it should happen. I think there's a time and a place for it. Going to where people are eating breakfast, I don't think that's the time or the place. That said, I was very dubious on this protest. I don't know how these people found Charlie Kirk and Miss Owens, Candace Owens, in Philadelphia. I'm suspicious of this, whether or not this is real or not. I'm not saying I know for sure. I don't. but it's kind of weird to me. They're not exactly, look, Laura, you're a much bigger star. You could go out to breakfast and nobody's protesting you. And so I'm a little like dubious on this whole thing. But this kind of protest shouldn't happen. We also shouldn't have a president who's out there calling the media the enemy of the people. That is a real problem in America. And I think that everything's got to calm down, and we've got to debate like we're doing right here, right now. Dan and I disagree on just about anything, but I love Dan, and I enjoy debating Dan about issues that affect America. And I think that's the kind of discourse we need right now.
What I think
not yelling and screaming.
Yeah, I think what Dan was getting at is important. I think what this Antifa group is trying to do is intimidate people from actually being in public. I don't know how they knew the guys were having breakfast. I have no idea. But it's an attempt to keep people like shuttered in their homes. I mean, I thought everybody was supposed to come out of the closet. Now you're supposed to stay in your home, not be able to leave, and not be able to go in public, or they will literally scream the most horrible words in front of your children. Doesn't matter what you're doing, because you're part of the. How is this a fascist to be speaking around the country? I don't understand how that makes you fascist. They don't know their history, Dan. They're doing it now to the Marine recruiting station, which, again, does not surprise me one bit. You saw that event in Berkeley over the weekend. Berkeley, you can always count on them for pro-freedom, pro-liberty stuff.
well, so we thought. Well, a couple of things here. Listen, on the enemy of the people line first from Chris. And Chris is right. I don't make it personal. Chris never have. But on the issues, the enemy of the people thing, that's not what Trump was saying. What Trump was talking about were the fake news people. And I want to be clear on this. If the fake news people want to stop being insulted and they want to stop the CNN sucks chance, then just stop sucking. It's a very simple. This isn't difficult. But secondly, he mentioned, Chris mentioned, you having a profile and you being able to eat lunch. My profile, I assure you, is far smaller than yours, Laura. And I've been confronted. I'm not a victim. Let me be clear. I'm not a snowflake. I am not in any way whining about it. All right? Everybody horse blinders on here. I'm just saying I've been confronted in public many times, one time in an airport where the TSA had to ask the dude to leave the line because he recognized me from Fox News and absolutely lost his marbles. Laura,
what?
At no point in my, I'm not kidding, at no point in my life have I ever, he did. The TSA said, sir, you're going to have to get off the line if you don't calm down. And in JFK in New York, people started clapping because he was given the boot. Now, I'm just saying, I have never in my life as a conservative, and I mean this sincerely, ever thought about approaching someone I ideologically disagreed with and aggressively confronting them in a public space. No. Ever. That is morally and ethically verboten. You just don't do it. And why the liberals think this is okay, I don't get.
Well, also, Dan, the left melting down after President Trump admitted that 2016 Trump Tower meeting with the Russians was meant to get dirt on Hillary. But, is that actually illegal? And what would that legal standard mean for Hillary Clinton and that dirty dossier? We're going to debate that coming up next. And we have a lot more to get to, including that crazy story of the radical Muslims in New Mexico holding children against their will, starving them, depriving them of water. What is going on with this story, and why is it being undercovered? We'll get to all of that and debate the Clinton and the dirty dossier issue coming up next. Now, you can argue all you want about whether the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting between senior campaign officials and Russian nationals offering dirt on Hillary was appropriate, but was it illegal? Trump critics are losing it after the president acknowledged the true intention of the meeting on Twitter yesterday. And MSNBC's Joe Scarborough thinks he knows exactly what this means.
It's illegal to get information, to get anything of worth from a foreign national. Mika, it doesn't have to be cash. There doesn't have to be an exchange of cash for something of value. Anything of value, that's called an in-kind contribution. And the law has always looked at that just as seriously as they've looked at, at money exchanging hands.
Oh, Joe. Joining me now to discuss this, former Deputy Trump campaign manager Dave Bossie, opinion contributor for The Hill, John Solomon, and attorney Leo Terrell. All right, Bossie, take it away. Joe was definitively putting his legal skills to work, definitively declaring it is illegal to meet with a foreign national who promises Oppo research. wouldn't that call Hillary's behavior?
Well, that's exactly. I was just about to say that's what the Clinton campaign did. If there's any collusion, it's their campaign with the Steele fake Russian dossier and paying Steele through the State Department, through other places, through the FBI. Look, they are the only ones. The Clinton campaign are the only ones that colluded during this campaign. Don Jr. did nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong here.
Why did they get the story a little mixed up there in the early days? Like it wasn't about the, and then it was, they didn't help with the statement. Like, let me tell you, as a lawyer who did criminal defense work, this is what I tell my clients. Do not talk about your case. Cierra la boca en español. Cierra la boca. Do not talk. Talk about economy, talk about other things. Leave the legal stuff to me. You cannot litigate this in the press because the press hates you.
That's right.
And you got 17 lawyers on the other side who don't care about what you tweet. So if the president's going to do what he's going to do, and he's really smart. But in the legal realm, it's a different ball game. It's a different ball game. And I think he's caused himself a world of pain and just not heartache, but a headache because of talking to the press. John.
Well, I'm never going to
talking about this.
Yeah, I don't want to never discourage anyone to talk to the press. They should always talk to the press.
Now, I may not talk about his case.
Yeah, but listen, where was my profession on this very law when the whole Hillary dossier thing was coming out? You didn't see any stories of reporters looking at that law saying it must apply here. Suddenly, someone says it applies to Donald Trump, and everybody goes with the pack over here. No one really goes and talks to lawyers. I've talked to lawyers, prosecutors. There's a great column by Jonathan Turley on the Hill site tonight. There's no chance that meeting violates the law.
He says that. We'll read from it. He said, if the Russians had evidence of criminal conduct by Hillary Clinton, her campaign, or family foundation, the Trump campaign had every reason to want to know about it. That's precisely what Clinton's campaign spent millions to do, talking to Russians and other foreigners investigating Trump. Indeed, under this interpretation of federal election laws, Clinton and her surrogates would be equally guilty in using a former foreign spy to gather info on Trump from foreign sources, including the Russians. Yeah. Period. Leo Terrell, your reaction to that?
Well, I'm glad you're a lawyer, Laura, and you know as well. Donald Trump Jr. better lawyer up because he, along with Jared, sat in that meeting, and I got news for you. That is conspiracy. That is a conspiracy
to do what?
defraud.
Listen, hey. What's the crime?
Conspiracy to defraud the election, to defraud the election. Their involvement.
What's the statute,
let me tell you right now, Donald Trump.
Give me the code. What's the statute?
I'm going to tell you right now. You can talk to right over your colleague, Judge Napolitano, and Leo Terrell agrees. Donald Trump Jr. is in trouble. Mark my words on this. And the idea of using the Clinton dossier, Clinton never met with any foreign nationals like Donald Trump Jr. and Jared. What a false distinction.
So you're
that
saying
is a false distinction.
So, Leo, number one, you can't cite a statute. Okay, I'll give you that. I'll let you off the hook for that. Number two, you're saying if you use intermediaries to gather information from foreign sources, then you obviate from having any responsibility in any conspiracy? Really? Because I think that would just make Fusion GPS, Hillary, and anyone else in the Justice Department who knew about this, who facilitated the production of the dossier.
Let me respond to my favorite talk show host. I'm saying to have a conspiracy, you have a meeting of the mind. Jared, Donald Trump Jr., conspiracy law. Remember today's date. There is no meeting of the minds with Hillary Clinton.
What's the you have to have an underlying law.
First of all, he's not pointing out.
You and I are the only lawyers on this panel, unfortunately. This is where.
No, fortunately.
Yeah, fortunately. I'm recovering, Leo. I'm recovering. But again, we have a situation where I agree on this point. Don't litigate this stuff in the press because politically, people say a lot of things politically, and they come close to the truth. They don't.
But can
None
I
of
point
that
out
matters as a legal matter. It might be unwise as a legal PR strategy, but it doesn't mean a crime was committed. That is wholly different.
They also uncovered.
You don't see conspiracy?
They also uncovered the text messages from Jared Kushner to his assistant saying, get me out of this meeting after 5 minutes. So that's called exculpatory evidence. And I would hope that you would say there's no conspiracy when people are trying to not be in a meeting.
I think it's funny, though, and John, maybe you'll respond to this. This is on CNN. I think I was on, the treadmill this morning. I'm watching this. I was almost at the Fred Flintstone thing and, fell off the treadmill because I'm listening to this going, wait a second. Which one of these is a lawyer coming to this conclusion? Let's watch.
To me, there are two big important things here. First of all, the law which says
that's a big one.
It's illegal to take anything of value from someone foreign.
Yeah, I feel that's an open and shut case.
Let's pick that up.
Oh, it's just an open and shut case. It's just all completely over, John.
I've said this many times on this show, on Hannity's show. I don't recognize the profession I practice in today. There are so many reporters that just say things in the moment without a basis for fact. You have to have a law to create a conspiracy. There's no law that prohibits people from taking information. If you extended this out, one of the lawyers I talked to today said, well, then it would have been against the law for Barack Obama to have arranged all those foreign trips in 2008 to make himself look good on the world stage before he got elected president. It wasn't designed to prohibit those sort of things. It was designed to prohibit the sort of things that the Clintons were doing in the 90s when they were taking money from China.
Donald Trump Jr. knew he was talking to agents of the Russian government. Remember that text? I love it. I love it. Remember that text, Laura? My
So
point
you're
is simply
saying,
this.
oh, wait,
Mark it down.
Leo, so are you making the Joe Scarborough, Edward Bennett Williams argument that this is an in-kind contribution? Because if you make that argument, then as Jonathan Turley said, it's the same liability, criminal liability on Hillary Clinton for an in-kind contribution that she received from a foreign source. She paid for it, but it doesn't matter. It's a conspiracy to get the information, whether you paid for it or not.
I'm saying to you, Attorney Ingraham, that the meeting of the minds, the conspiracy of having that meeting, you don't need the act itself. They met to get dirt from a governmental
adoption meeting,
and that's what I'm talking about. Conspiracy.
Don Jr. was on. Okay, Don Jr. is on my radio show today in the morning, and I asked him about this meeting. Let's listen to what he said.
It's sort of the cycles of the media narrative, right? The other stuff isn't sticking, so they're back now. Tomorrow they'll be back on the 25th Amendment. Literally nothing's changed. They don't talk about sort of the genesis of that meeting and that these people were dealing with Fusion GPS before and after the meeting, et cetera, et cetera. Like I said, it was a 20-minute meeting. It ended up being, about essentially nothing that was relevant to any of these things. And, that's all it is, and that's all they've got. And, that is, I guess, the ultimate distraction from what's really going on in this country, which is you have a Republican president, a very conservative president who's getting stuff done.
Can I just make one last comment and I'll keep my mouth shut? Right. One last comment. Yeah. One last comment. Donald Trump Jr. said that meeting was about Russian adoption. His dad threw him under the bus today by saying that's not true. And Donald Trump Jr. has a problem with the Senate Intelligence Committee.
Leo,
he didn't tell the full disclosure.
This stuff is being repeated on TV all day long, and it's wrong. Yeah. Here's what happened. Okay. This woman pledged to give dirt on Hillary. Yes, she did, and that's what the president said. However, she was trying to push for a removal or to rescind the Magnitsky Act. Putin, when the Magnitsky Act was passed, which put all the sanctions on the billionaires, he said, oh, really? We're going to stop all adoptions of Russians into the United States. I have 2 Russian sons. I followed this very closely. That's why she brought up, she said, we'll give you the adoption if you guys get rid of the Magnitsky. So he's right. Of course she talked about the adoption. That was true. They all documented
She also met with Fusion GPS, I believe, the day before the meeting and the day after the meeting. Yeah. So this is part of a conspiracy of what Hillary Clinton's campaign was doing.
Now, and by the way, John Solomon, I want to find out, maybe you can do the reporting on this. Why hasn't Mueller interviewed Veselnitskaya? Why haven't they brought Veselnitskaya in? Why?
Well, we don't know that he hasn't. That's one of the things.
I think she offered to testify. I don't believe she's been brought in unless something new has happened in the last week.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of information flowing to her to the press.
This investigation has been going on for 2 years and cost over $25 million of taxpayer money. And this is where we are today talking about
Let me just say that Donald Trump Jr. needs a lawyer up immediately.
Leo, I'm not trying to cut you off, but we're going to go to black, and I'm going to get in trouble. But thank you. It was a great panel. The year of the woman. We're shortchanging the women. Trumpeted by the left is rapidly morphing into the year of the radical. We'll explain next. Remember back in 1992, they called that the year of the woman, the Democrats did in the election. And then it was 2016 with Hillary was the year of the woman. And now here we are again, 2018. Let's try a third time around. It's being called the year of the woman by some in the media and, of course, on the left. But if you listen to high-profile female Democrats, including 2020 presidential candidates, you know this next person is running, you'd be forgiven for thinking it's the year of the radical. Just take a look.
I am a democratic socialist. The Republicans are going to call us socialists no matter what we do.
problem, guys, with that phrase, identity politics. When people say that, it's a pejorative. That phrase is used to divide and it is used to distract. Its purpose is to minimize and marginalize issues that impact all of us.
Oh, we back? Oh, joining me now for reactions, Kathy Arue, publisher of Catalina Magazine, along with Kristen Tate, columnist for the Hill newspaper. All right, let's start with you, Kathy. Yeah. The socialist thing, like Cynthia Nixon, okay, Cynthia Nixon, I get that. But when you look at the actual polling on this,
right,
it doesn't work. I mean, it doesn't work for women voters, doesn't work for most American voters. Most people believe in the capitalist system. They don't think everything's fair, but nothing is fair in life. I mean, not everything's fair.
Right.
So what's going on here with the socialist label and the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and all that?
Exactly. I think the Cortez win has drawn everyone to be so extreme. And this is not the party. This is not our party.
It is your party. What are you talking about? Who do you think? Okay, wait a second. That's Kamala Harris. Who's pretty much hugging up to the socialist thing. I mean, all of her policies are socialist. Medicare for all, that's universal health care. Everyone gets free education. What do you call that other than socialism?
This is very extreme. I mean, this is not the heart of the party, not at all. I wouldn't say that. Many Democrats, many leaders right now are just cringing when they hear this S word. No, the Democrats, my sources, do not want to be associated with the S word at all. They're hoping that this little fringe movement kind of goes away because it's dividing the party. It's very extreme, just like Donald Trump made people so nervous, and he was so extreme with the GOP. The same thing. Both parties they have their extremists.
No. Donald Trump represented the heartland view of what conservatism should have been all along, namely
he pushed
taking
that
on China
movement for so long.
Trade
that was
deals.
So extreme.
On his policies, I'm sorry, but the policies are not extreme. They're actually standing up to China. Tax reforms, conservative judges. This is not extreme. That's the liberal dream of trying to do it. Okay, here's Senator Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten. This is what she said on Friday. She said, let's just start with the hard truth about the criminal justice system. It's racist. It is. And when I say our system, I mean all the way. I mean front to back. This is just not sentencing reform we're talking about here. We're talking about the front end on what you declare to be illegal and how you enforce it and who gets arrested. So she's now Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton. Kirsten, is this going to work? Is this what women want today?
No, the far left has totally hijacked the Democratic Party. The socialist message will resonate with some naive far left voters, many of whom are economically ignorant. A big part of this issue, Laura, is that colleges today are more interested in teaching kids how to become professional protesters than they are in teaching them anything about economics or finance. And the Democrats in power, they want to keep it that way. They've learned that messages of free stuff and rich people are greedy are, easy, brainless messages to send to the undereducated. It's shameless. But I got to tell you, the vast majority of Americans are terrified of socialism. They see what's going on in Venezuela and in parts of Europe. Socialism does not work.
Kathy,
it's clear.
Kathy, go ahead.
But that's the whole point. The vast majority of Americans, many being Democrats, many being part of the Democratic Party, do not want socialism. So the majority does not agree with this small group. So this is a small group. This is a